பகுத்துண்டு பல்லுயிர் ஓம்புதல் நூலோர் தொகுத்தோற்றில் எல்லாம் தலை. The meaning that is ascribed to this famous Tirukkural is the highest virtue of living is, sharing and consuming in moderation and protecting all forms of life. Hello, I am Bharatha Chakravarthy, Judge Madras High Court and a member of the Green Bench. You will be wondering why this member of the judiciary is foraying into literature. Well, I have a point to make. According to me, the correct interpretation of the couplet is nurturing biodiversity by sharing the resources, sharing the planet is the cardinal principle of law. Nurturing biodiversity by sharing the planet is the cardinal principle of law. Well, we do things from a human perspective. Ecocentrism is understanding nature for its very intrinsic value. Ladies and gentlemen, I strongly believe ecocentrism is the solution for both prevention and mitigation of all the ill effects of the climate change. Well, all day long we have been talking about climate change and its ill effects. Did you ever wonder why are we here? I mean, in the southern peninsula of this Indian subcontinent. This is home for 500 million people. Thousands of years, cultures thrived, civilizations flourished. Why and how? My dear friends, the answer according to me is Western Ghats. Western Ghats is a strip of mountains which occupy only 6% of our space, starting from Gujarat ending up to Kanyakumari. It's home for thousands of species of flora and fauna. Hundreds of endangered species live here. About 4,000 to 5,000 species are endemic. That means that you can find only here and nowhere else in the world. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. About 43 rivers originate from here and run on either side, which only provide for drinking water and irrigation. The mountains intercept the southwest winds and create a monsoon pattern, and more importantly, a warm weather, fostering so much life in this part of the world. Suffice it to state that but for this Western Ghats, the southern peninsula will be a desert and you and I will not be living here. Being that rich in flora and fauna, from the place of biodiversity, it has now become a biodiversity hotspot. We have to think. Let me just focus on two regions of this Western Ghats. First, the Agasthyar biosphere, which is the southernmost tip of the Western Ghats, which is in the Kanyakumari, Tirunelveli, and Trivandrum and Kollam districts of Kerala. It is famous for thousands of life-saving herbs. It is the home for the river Tamrabarani. It is a very important site as per the UNESCO Man and Biosphere program. You know what happened? Just when the British arrived in the 1800s, man became greedy. He started foraying into this forest and devastation began. As a matter of fact, a gentleman by name Mr. Puckle, who was the then collector of Tirunelveli, had flagged this issue, and he has even taken steps to prevent these forests. But he was all alone. For the British Empire, Indian forests were as a resource. They favored Jamindari system because they can augment income. With that law and policy in background, in the year 1885, when the Singambatti Jameen in Tirunelveli district claimed ownership of large tracts of this forest area, the High Court upheld their claim, including the claims for ecologically sensitive upper reserves and affluent reserves of Tamrabarni. Now fast forward 3 decades, the next miner of the said Jameen was undergoing his education in Newington College in Tenampet. The British had a policy under which, they host all the miners of these Jamindars in this Newington College at Tenampet. That's why it's called as Miners' Bungalow. Now at that time, the chief inspector, a British national by name Clement de la Haye, was murdered. And this Singambatti miner and another miner were tried for the offence. The trial shifted from Madras to Bombay. You know what? The legend goes, unable to bear the legal expenses, large tracts of this ecologically sensitive area was leased out, and it was all converted into cultivating tea and other gardens. Man entered the forest and the millions of this flora and fauna disappeared. Devastation began. Let me just move on to another biosphere, the Nilgiri biosphere. We all know that the Nilgiri biosphere is also yet another important biosphere of the Western Ghats. Its tall peak intercept with the clouds, bring the rain. Its vast grasslands, each blade of grass can withhold about 8 liters of water. The water then goes to the spongy swamps which store the water, and the excess drips perennially into the streams that flow into the Shola forest, which is home for millions of flora and fauna. The biodiversity thrived like anything in Nilgiris. But what happened? The British introduced tea and coffee. Not stopping with that, exotic species such as wattle, blue gum were all introduced. They became invasives. The entire grasslands disappeared. The earth became bone dry. The very ecosystem is lost. Not to mention about the millions of microorganisms and the insects that existed in that swamps. Now we have to think, why all that happened? Because of lawlessness. Even after independence, we all know that there was abject poverty in our country, and all our focus was to uplift the people from out of the poverty. While that was being done, with the increase in population and industrialization, there was huge pressure on this mountain and its ecosystem. Only in the year 1976 we amended our constitution. Article 48A was introduced, mandating the states by way of a directive policy to protect the environment and forest. Article 51A was introduced, imposing a fundamental duty on all of us, the citizens, to protect the environment and forest. Several legislations came, such as the Environment Protection Act, the Forest Protection Act came. India became signatories to many international treaties for biodiversity conservation and also protection of forest. But all that was not translating on the ground. Ultimately, the judiciary which has to step in. In the Godavarman Tirmalpad case in the year 1997, for the first time the Supreme Court of India said, no tree will ever be felled inside our forest. Nothing outside the forest became the norm. Thereafter came the new forest conservation policy. Then the second order came in the year 2007, non-diversion of forest and forest lands. Forest was not to be treated as a resource, nothing outside the forest, and it has to be conserved. Even then, when our law was getting better, we talked about being prudent, be intergenerational equity, keep something for the next generation also. Sustainable development as a human right. All was from an anthropocentric perspective. But 2017 came the watershed movement. The Honorable Supreme Court of India in the very same case said, hereafter our policy towards environment and forest would only be ecocentric, which means that the nature will have the right to existence not because it is useful for humans but on its own very right. The immediate fallout was, in the same year, the same Madras High Court ruled to redirect those plantations back to the forest kitty. The invasive policy is now on and we are trying to restore those grasslands. Not stopping with that, in the year 2023, the Honorable Supreme Court in Muhammad Qasim's case elevated the very concept of ecocentrism and biocentrism. It said, nature is no more an object of protection, but will be a subject with all fundamental rights to exist, to survive, to regenerate and to proliferate. It is not just an object to be protected, but it is a subject with a fundamental right. Everybody has to understand nature for its very intrinsic worth. And finally it said, the courts hereafter will be acting as parens patriae, which means that guardian-in-law. Is that enough? According to me, yes, the courts will act as parens patriae, but we the people should also be the guardians of these ecosystems. It is the social will that should dictate the law. Now, how do we imbibe ecocentrism in our walks of life? Let me again borrow from yet another Tamil literature. It's an ancient Sangam poem. The popular phrase is Numminum Sirandaval Nuvai. Let me explain. A young maiden was strolling along the beach with her man. They came near a tree. It's a calophyllum tree called as Punnai tree in this part of the world. When they came near the tree, the guy pulled the girl near. The girl blushed and said, No, not here, not in front of my sister. The guy couldn't understand. The girl explained, when she was only 6 years old, she planted that sapling. Her mother nourished the tree like the same way she nourished the daughter, in fact more than that. And she used to say, the tree daughter is a special daughter to her than the daughter herself. And that is how she connected to the tree as her own sister, and she can't be romantic before the sister. Ladies and gentlemen, this poem somewhat explains to us as to how to assimilate ecocentrism within us. By Western Ghats, I don't mean just the mountains alone. It's the mountains, the forests, the buffer area, the riverine system, and all the ecosystem associated to it. She is the nature. She is the foster mother who nourishes all. Don't look at her as the destination for your humanistic pleasure, but respect her, for she has a better right to survive than all of us. Treat her as our own family member, having a special right to survive. Let me conclude by saying this in Tamil. Namminum Sirandaval Iyarkai. Thank you.